The Holy Gospel according to Matthew.
Glory to you, O Lord.
I'd like to back up a couple of verses than what is printed in your bulletin this morning to help kind of put into context what will follow in what you have in print. So I'm backing up to the end of the 3rd chapter. And when Jesus was baptized, just as he came up from the water, suddenly the heavens were opened to him, and he saw the Spirit of God descending like a dove and alighting on him. And a voice from heaven said, "This is my Son, the Beloved, with whom I am well pleased." There, the relationship has been established. This is my Son, the Beloved. The story continues. Jesus was led up by the Spirit into the wilderness to be tempted by the devil. He fasted 40 days and 40 nights, and afterwards was famished. The tempter came and said to him, "If you are the Son of God, command these stones to become loaves of bread." But Jesus answered, "It is written, one does not live by bread alone, but by every word that comes from the mouth of God." Then the devil took Jesus to the holy city and placed him on the pinnacle of the temple, saying to him, "If you are the Son of God, throw yourself down, for it is written, God will give you into the angels' charge, and on their hands they will bear you up, so that you will not dash your foot against a stone." Jesus said to the devil, "Again it is written, do not put the Lord your God to the test." Again, the devil took Jesus to a very high mountain and showed him all the realms of the world and their splendor, and said to him, "All these I will give you, if you will fall down and worship me." Jesus said to the devil, "Away with you, Satan, for it is written, worship the Lord your God, serve God alone." Then the devil left him, and suddenly angels came and waited on him. The Gospel of the Lord.
Praise to you, O Lord.
With water splashing, the Spirit fluttering, and a voice from heaven echoing, the journey begins. Lent has begun again. My mother would frequently, when faced with a challenge, or when one of her 5 children were faced with a challenge and we couldn't quite resolve it, her comment would more often than not be, "We're always being tested, aren't we?" Now, my mother was not at all a religious person. How she bore a son of 40 years in ministry, that's God's choice, and it's God's humor. She was raised by conservative Swedes, Baptist to be precise, and she couldn't be bothered with the hypocrisy of the church as she saw it. And this text today reminds me that she had her moments when she was just spot on. Another test before us. Here in Matthew's Gospel is the great test. The test of what is important in water splashing, what is important in Spirit fluttering, and what is important in heavenly echoing in terms of our life and faith. And in that life, what is it that informs our life, our relationships in this world, and what would make a difference? What is it that keeps us from total, complete theological bankruptcy? How do we come to understand not so much what sin is, but what does sin do in us? And on what grounds do we make those decisions in our life? How many of you watched the Super Bowl a couple weeks ago? How many of you liked the game better than the commercials? That was really telling. How many of you liked the commercials better than the game? Oh, there's more Eagle fans in here than that. Did you catch the commercials, though? They're always almost more fun to watch. But that game, I have to say, was a game well played and worth a watch. A colleague in Kenmore, where I live, has engaged a conversation on one of the commercials that was shown during the Super Bowl. It was the commercial that was called "He Gets Us." Have any of you seen it or heard of it? Are you familiar? Either before the game or after the game, it kind of goes on and on, right? It seems that everyone of faith has an opinion, right, about "He gets us" and the ads that were at the Super Bowl. Some are completely enamored with the concept of reaching out with a message about Jesus to such an incredibly broad audience. And we have to admit that that is something that Christians don't seem to be able to access as much in the United States as they once did. And there are others who question both the expense. Somewhere around $100 million was spent on that ad. And the question automatically is raised, well, whether such a vast sum of money could have been put to better use. There's also concern about who is funding this and what people will see if they go to the website that's listed at the end of the commercial. Several sources report that the family who owns Hobby Lobby are among the main backers of the campaign. This family and its company has become infamous in denial of vaccines, COVID vaccines, of female reproductive health, of LGBTQIA2S+ rights and dignity, and participation in the theft of biblical antiquities. They are associated with a brand of Christianity that is looking more and more like Christian nationalism than anything else. What if, people wonder, that the messages of all of the ads which promote care for the marginalized, the refugees, compromise, and relationship are being used in these commercials as kind of a smokescreen for getting people into churches that don't really practice any of the things that these ads preach? And I confess that up until the Super Bowl time, I didn't pay a whole lot of attention to the ads because of the main what I see as conceit in the ads. He, being Jesus, gets us. That is absolutely, undeniably true. God knows, Jesus knows exactly what it means to be human. With all of the emotion, all of the excitement, even the exquisitely mundane existence of our human lives. But I really do not believe that that is as nearly important for God or for us as a way of all that. Why would God do that? And there's only one answer, and it is because of love. God loves us before Jesus ever came and dwelt with us. For at the very moment that God's hands touched the dirt to form us in the divine image, it was born out of love. And it is that love from which all things spring, and above all else that is in the good news that Jesus made manifest to us and calls you and I and all Christians to make that known in the world. The He Gets Us campaign lacks the gravity and effect that it could otherwise have, because in a world where information is so readily available in so many forms that you have to have organizations like Verify to find out if it's true or not. People who see those promote these fair words, but bear fruits that are a bitter, bitter poison. Throughout all of the Gospels, Jesus commends those who go and do as being closest to the commonwealth of God. And we, as Lutherans and many other denominations, have taken that to heart. For we all love the idea of our actions to do the talking for us, to attract people without having to preach at them. And it would be easy then to dismiss He gets us out of hand. But then Jesus also said something else in the Gospels. He directed all of us as followers to go and preach the gospel. Again, something that we Lutherans take quite seriously. For if we are really a people that are not yet ready to tell others what drives our actions, how are others to respond to the loving gifts of God? Most especially the gift of Jesus the Christ in His birth, His life, His death, and His resurrection. And if we fail to do that, then you and I are all failing to fulfill the request of Jesus, to help people understand what God wants and to jumpstart people's relationship with God and with God's people. Yeah, God and Jesus may get us. But that question is not really even on the test page. For how do we choose to respond to God's unrelenting, fathomless love for us in a world which Jesus shares? There is the question that's on the test. It can't be just words, and it can't be just actions. It must be both. And when there is both attention in our faith, that in-between space of those two pieces is what we call grace. That moment where God intercedes in between and draws both together as a whole. We must do the work of getting ready for God's commonwealth, bearing the wonderful fruits of peace, of patience, of justice, of love. And we must share that story to plant the seed that might one day bear that fruit. It can only be both. Last Wednesday was Ash Wednesday, the first day of Lent. It was a delight to be here to worship with many of you. And when all was done, I was beat. So I went home, put on my house pants and shirt, got ash all over my sweatshirt, and I said, "Thanks, God." But I could not settle in. I could not settle down. The energy that was running through me just wasn't going to stop. So at 11:30 at night on Channel 7, Late Night with Stephen Colbert is on. Stephen is a practicing and a very good Roman Catholic, and he announced that for Lent he was giving up peanut M&Ms. He asked the band if any of them were giving up anything for Lent. And most were just kind of, looking at tops of shoes, not responding, or they were not saying anything at all. But the drummer, Joe Saylor, somewhat reluctantly announced that he was giving up social media for Lent. Good for him. Folks, late night comedy now has Lent in it. Wow! An age-old practice of what to give up. It can be a good thing. Of years gone by, I have given up giving up things for Lent. And I have taken up the practice of taking up something for Lent. Because anything in and of itself, if it does not come back to lift up the God that loves us, and if it's a practice done just for a practice to be done, we too have missed the mark. You push it too far, and it becomes a means to its own end. So in the gospel today, Jesus is confronted with the issues of human need, of bread, of physical bread, of metaphorical bread, of theological bread. He's confronted with making ourselves God. And he is confronted with the political and religious allegiance that exists in the world. Come, all these I will give you if you fall down and worship me. But no, the text today, the test today for you and for me is to invite us into a much larger picture. A picture of who I am, of who you are, of who we are together, and of who God is. Of who Jesus is, the one who gets us. It is a picture of taking up a life of love this season. That what we do and what we say, it is love that comes first. And as Matthew, at the very, very, very last chapter in his gospel, the words of Jesus come to reassure us this day as we hold the tensions of our life in the world. That as we take up a journey to the cross and through that cross to new life, Matthew gives us the words of Jesus. I will never leave or forsake you. Blessings on the journey.